The diner was quiet that evening, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. Joe's diner wasn't fancy. It had cracked vinyl seats, chipped formica tables, and flickering fluorescent lights. But it was cozy. People came here not just for food, but for company, for stories shared over steaming cups of coffee. On this particular Tuesday, the air smelled faintly of fried onions and fresh pie, mixing with the low hum of conversation. Jack Miller stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface with practiced ease. His hands moved rhythmically, the cloth making small circles as he kept one eye on the clock. It was almost closing time, but there were still a few customers lingering. At the far end of the diner, near the window, sat a man who caught everyone's attention when he walked in. He looked like someone out of an old Western movie, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. His cowboy hat rested on the table beside him, and he wore a plain flannel shirt tucked into jeans that looked like they'd seen better days. He sipped black coffee slowly, his movements deliberate, almost unhurried. What made him stand out even more was what he was doing. Instead of reading a menu or scrolling through his phone like most people, he was sketching something on a napkin. Every now and then he'd pause, glance thoughtfully at the paper, and then add another line or curve. Nobody could see exactly what he was drawing, but it didn't matter. The way he held himself, with quiet confidence, was enough to draw curious glances from the other patrons. Behind him, in a booth by the wall, sat two men in their late 20s. They weren't hard to spot. Their uniforms were folded neatly on the seat beside them, marking them as off-duty cops. Steve and Ryan had come to the diner after their shift, looking to unwind. Both were tall and muscular, with the kind of swagger that came from years of authority. They joked loudly, their laughter carrying across the room as they recounted stories from their day. At first, they paid no mind to the stranger, but after a while, Steve nudged Ryan and tilted his head toward the man. "Check him out," Steve said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Who does he think he is? Some kind of cowboy hero?" Ryan snorted, leaning back in his seat. "Maybe he thinks he's Chuck Norris or something." The comment earned a round of chuckles from both men. Their voices grew louder, filling the same diner with echoes of mockery. "Hey, buddy," Steve called out, half shouting so the entire room could hear. "You ever catch any bad guys, or do you just sit around pretending to be tough?" The man didn't react. He didn't even look up from his napkin. If anything, he seemed completely absorbed in whatever he was sketching. This only encouraged the two cops further. "Guess we scared him off," Ryan said, grinning. "Probably doesn't want to admit he's all talk." Melissa, the waitress refilling the stranger's cup, hesitated for a moment. She was younger than the others, with curly brown hair tied back in a ponytail and a name tag pinned crookedly to her apron. Her instincts told her to intervene, but she wasn't sure how. Instead, she glanced nervously between the laughing cops and the silent man. When she leaned in to pour more coffee, she noticed something odd about the napkin. It wasn't just doodles, it looked technical, almost like a blueprint. Lines intersected with precision, forming shapes and patterns she couldn't quite understand. "Okay?" Melissa asked softly, keeping her voice low. The man finally looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. There was something magnetic about his gaze, calm yet intense. For a split second, she felt like he was seeing straight through her. Then he gave a slight nod and returned to his work without saying a word. Meanwhile, Steve and Ryan were getting bolder. "Come on, cowboy," Steve taunted, raising his voice again. "Don't be shy, show us your badge. Or are you just here to drink our coffee?" More laughter followed, though it sounded forced now. Some of the other diners shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. Jack paused mid-wipe, his brow furrowing as he watched the scene unfold. Even Melissa, despite her unease, found herself drawn into the tension. She approached the officer's table, balancing her tray carefully. "Guys, maybe lay off," she suggested, trying to keep her tone light. "He hasn't done anything to you." Steve waved her away dismissively. "Relax, Mel, we're just having fun." Ryan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's not like he's gonna fight back." But Melissa wasn't convinced. Something about the stranger felt different. There was an aura of mystery around him, a sense that he wasn't someone to mess with. Still, she didn't argue further. Instead, she retreated to the safety of the counter, glancing occasionally at the man in the corner. By now, the diner had gone eerily quiet. Conversations had dwindled to murmurs, and even the clinking of silverware against plates seemed muted. All eyes were either on the two cops or the lone figure ignoring them. The contrast was striking. The loud, boisterous duo versus the silent, composed man who hadn't so much as flinched at their taunts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man set down his pen. He folded the napkin neatly and slipped it into his pocket before reaching for his wallet. Melissa hurried over to collect his bill, though she stayed close, as if ready to step in if things escalated. To her surprise, the man handed her exact change, his fingers brushing briefly against hers. His touch was firm but gentle, and for some reason it sent a shiver down her spine. As he stood up to leave, Steve couldn't resist one last jab. "Hey, old-timer," he called out, smirking. "You forgot your desk." He gestured dramatically to the empty space beside the man, mocking the idea that such a laid-back guy could have anything important. For the first time since he'd entered the diner, the man turned fully toward the cops. His expression remained calm, but there was a glint in his eye, a spark of amusement, perhaps, or something darker. Without a word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metallic device. It fit easily in the palm of his hand, its surface smooth and unmarked. "What's that supposed to be?" Ryan sneered, crossing his arms. But before anyone could answer, the man pressed a button on the device. In an instant, holographic projections filled the air, swirling arrays of schematics, maps, and equations that defied comprehension. The diner fell silent, every pair of eyes wide with shock. "Desk?" the man repeated, his voice steady and measured. "Oh, you mean this?" The holograms hung in the air like ghosts, shimmering and shifting as if alive. They filled the space between the man and the two cops, who sat frozen in their booth, mouths agape. Lines and shapes danced in intricate patterns, forming diagrams that seemed to defy logic. Melissa, the waitress, stood rooted to the spot behind the counter, her fingers gripping the handle of the coffee pot so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jack, the diner owner, had stopped wiping the counter altogether, his rag dangling limply in one hand. Even the other patrons, who moments ago had been chatting quietly or sipping their drinks, now stared in stunned silence. "What is that?" Melissa finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. She glanced at the stranger, half expecting him to laugh and say it was all some elaborate prank. But he didn't. Instead, he simply looked at her, his piercing blue eyes calm yet unreadable. "Something I've been working on," he said softly, almost casually, as if revealing advanced technology in a diner was an everyday occurrence. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, the holograms vanished. He pressed another button on the device, and the glowing images dissolved into thin air, leaving only the faint hum of the diner's fluorescent lights. Steve and Ryan exchanged uneasy glances. Their bravado from earlier had evaporated completely, replaced by confusion and fear. "Okay, buddy, we were just joking around," Steve stammered, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of surrender. His voice lacked its usual confidence, sounding instead like a plea. "No harm meant." Chuck, the name everyone had silently agreed on for the mysterious man, didn't respond immediately. He slipped the device back into his jacket pocket and turned toward the register. Without looking at anyone, he dropped a few crumpled bills onto the counter. The coins clinked softly against the surface, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. "You think he's dangerous?" Ryan muttered under his breath, leaning closer to Steve. His partner shook his head, though his eyes remained glued to Chuck's back. "I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out." Melissa watched as Chuck walked toward the door, his boots clicking against the tiled floor. For a moment she considered saying something, thanking him for not retaliating maybe, or apologizing for the behavior of the two cops, but the words caught in her throat. There was something about him that made her hesitate, something both reassuring and intimidating at the same time. As the door swung shut behind him, the diner erupted into murmurs. People began talking all at once, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mix of awe and speculation. "Did you see that thing? What even was it?" one customer asked, shaking his head in disbelief. Another chimed in. "It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie." Jack finally snapped out of his daze and started clearing tables, muttering to himself about how strange the evening had become. Melissa, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. She glanced at the empty booth, where Chuck had been sitting, noticing for the first time the folded napkin he'd left behind. Curiosity got the better of her and she picked it up carefully, smoothing it out on the counter. The sketch was unlike anything she'd ever seen. It depicted what looked like a weapon, a sleek, futuristic design etched meticulously onto the paper. Notes written in tiny handwriting surrounded the drawing, detailing measurements and calculations. Melissa felt a chill run down her spine. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just passing through town. He was involved in something far beyond the scope of ordinary life. Back in their booth, Steve and Ryan were already regretting their decision to mock him. "We really stepped in at this time," Ryan admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "What if he reports us? Or worse, what if he comes back?" Steve frowned, his mind racing. "He doesn't seem like the type to call the station. But still, we should probably keep an eye out just in case." Neither of them mentioned the possibility that Chuck might be connected to something illegal or something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Meanwhile, outside the diner, Chuck climbed into a battered pickup truck parked under a flickering street lamp. The vehicle looked decades old, its paint chipped and rusted, but it roared to life without hesitation when he turned the key. On the passenger seat lay the small metallic device, humming softly as though alive. Chuck glanced at it briefly before pulling away from the curb, the tires crunching over gravel as he drove off into the night. Inside the diner, the tension lingered long after he was gone. Melissa tucked the napkin into her apron pocket, unsure why she felt compelled to hold on to it. Maybe it was evidence. Maybe it was just a reminder of how unpredictable life could be. Either way, she knew tonight would stay with her for a long time. About 20 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as they approached the diner. Two patrol cars screeched to a halt outside, their doors slamming shut almost simultaneously. Out stepped Agent Laura Bennett, a no-nonsense investigator known for handling unusual cases. She wore a sharp gray suit and carried a leather briefcase, her presence commanding immediate attention. Laura entered the diner with purpose, her sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her expression gave nothing away. "Who's in charge here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the lingering chatter like a knife. Jack raised his hand hesitantly. "That'd be me. I'm Jack Miller, the owner." Laura nodded briskly and opened her notebook. "Tell me everything that happened here, tonight. Start from the beginning." Melissa stepped forward, clutching the napkin tightly in her pocket. She recounted the events as clearly as she could, describing the stranger's appearance, the mocking comments from the cops, and the holographic display that had left everyone speechless. Others joined in, adding details and confirming her story. By the time she finished, Laura's pen had scribbled pages of notes. "And you say he left this behind?" Laura asked, pointing to the napkin Melissa held out tentatively. Melissa nodded. "Yes, I thought it might be important." Laura studied the sketch carefully, her brow furrowing as she took in the intricate design. "This is interesting," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. After a moment, she slipped the napkin into a plastic bag and sealed. "Thank you. This will help us identify him." Turning to Steve and Ryan, who had shrunk slightly under her piercing gaze, Laura's tone hardened. "You two, did either of you get his name or any identifying information?" Ryan shook his head nervously. "No, ma'am. We didn't think to ask." Laura sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Well, let's hope your little stunt hasn't caused too much trouble. In the meantime, I'll need statements from everyone who witnessed this." She gestured to the officers accompanying her. "Take their details and start processing the scene. As the investigators began their work, Melissa couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Had she done the right thing by turning over the napkin? And what exactly had she gotten herself, and everyone else involved in? Outside, Chuck's truck rumbled down a deserted highway, the stars above twinkling faintly in the clear night sky. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the metallic device, examining it thoughtfully. Whatever mission he was on, it was clear he wasn't alone. Somewhere, out there, forces were moving, and the quiet diner encounter was only the beginning. The highway stretched endlessly into the horizon, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate countryside. Chuck's pickup truck rattled along the uneven surface, its engine groaning with every mile. To anyone else, the sound might have been alarming, but to Chuck it was familiar, a reminder of countless journeys taken under similar circumstances. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, fingers drumming absent-mindedly as he scanned the empty road ahead. On the passenger seat beside him, the small metallic device continued to hum softly, its faint glow casting shadows across the worn interior of the truck. Occasionally, the light flickered as though responding to some unseen signal. Chuck glanced at it briefly before returning his focus to the rearview mirror. Behind him, red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter with each passing second. "They're persistent," he muttered to himself, his voice low and steady. He wasn't surprised. People like him didn't go unnoticed for long. Still, the timing was inconvenient. He had hoped to put more distance between himself and the diner before they caught up, but here they were, closing in fast. Back at Joe's diner, Agent Laura Bennett was piecing together the puzzle. Armed with Melissa's napkin sketch and statements from the witnesses, she began forming a clearer picture of the mysterious man. Chuck Norris, she repeated aloud, flipping through her notes. It wasn't his real name, of course. She doubted anyone present knew his true identity, but it fit the image he projected. Calm, confident, almost mythical. Laura turned to Steve and Ryan, who stood awkwardly near the counter, still looking guilty about their earlier behavior. "You two," she said sharply, snapping them out of their thoughts. "Did you notice anything unusual about him besides the holograms? Any distinguishing marks, tattoos, or scars?" Ryan shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. Just the hat, I guess." Steve chimed in, rubbing the back of his neck. "And those eyes. They were kind of intense." "Intense," Laura echoed, jotting it down. She'd heard similar descriptions from others, calm but piercing, impossible to read. Whoever this man was, he clearly didn't want attention. And yet, here he was, leaving behind enough clues to make her job easier. Outside, the investigators combed the area around the diner, searching for any trace of evidence. Tire tracks led away from the parking lot, heading east toward the highway. One officer radioed in the direction, while another snapped photos of the scene. Laura studied the map spread out on the hood of her car, tracing possible routes with her finger. "If he's smart, and I suspect he is, he'll stick to back roads. Less traffic, fewer cameras." Meanwhile, Melissa lingered nearby, watching the commotion unfold. She felt torn between relief that the authorities were handling things and guilt over how it all started. If she hadn't mentioned the napkin, would they have come looking for him? Would he still be safe? She didn't know, but the questions kept gnawing at her. Back on the highway, Chuck checked the rearview mirror again. The patrol cars were closer now, their sirens wailing as they gained ground. He sighed, shifting gears and pressing harder on the accelerator. The truck protested loudly, but it obeyed, surging forward with renewed determination. He reached for the metallic device on the passenger seat and activated it once more. This time, instead of holograms, a series of symbols appeared on its surface, blinking rapidly in sequence. Chuck tapped one of the symbols and the device emitted a high-pitched whine. A moment later, the dashboard lit up with a soft green glow, and the truck seemed to hum with newfound energy. "What the hell?" one of the pursuing officers exclaimed as the pickup suddenly accelerated, leaving them far behind. Despite its age and condition, the vehicle moved with unnatural speed, its tires gripping the road as though magnetized. Chuck allowed himself a small smile. Technology had its advantages, especially when you needed to outrun trouble. Agent Laura, Bennett received the update moments later via radio. Subject vehicle has increased speed significantly, the officer reported. We're falling behind. Laura frowned, tapping her pen against the notebook. Keep your distance but maintain. Visual contact. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. She paused, considering her next move. Whoever this man was, he clearly had resources beyond what they'd anticipated. That device of his was no ordinary gadget, it was advanced, possibly experimental. Which meant there was more at stake than just catching a runaway suspect. At the diner, Jack closed up early, locking the doors and turning off the neon sign. The events of the evening weighed heavily on everyone, and the usual chatter was replaced by uneasy silence. Melissa helped clean up, her mind racing with unanswered questions. What had the man been working on? Why had he chosen their diner as a stop, and most importantly, who or what was chasing him? As she wiped down tables, something caught her eye, a faint glimmer beneath one of the booths. Kneeling down, she discovered a small object wedged between the seat and the wall. It was another piece of technology, smaller than the device Chuck had shown them, but equally intriguing. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the dim overhead lights. Melissa hesitated, then slipped it into her pocket. Whatever it was, it belonged to him, and maybe, just maybe, it could help explain what was going on. By now, Chuck had reached the outskirts of town, where the highway gave way to winding country roads. The patrol cars struggled to keep up, their headlights bouncing wildly as they navigated sharp turns and narrow lanes. Chuck slowed slightly, allowing them to stay within sight without getting too close. He didn't want to lose them entirely. Not yet. They were pawns in a larger game, pieces on a chessboard he couldn't afford to ignore. Up ahead, a weathered sign marked the entrance to an abandoned gas station. Chuck steered the truck onto the gravel driveway, parking it behind the dilapidated building. He stepped out cautiously, scanning the area for signs of movement. The air was cool and still, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets. Satisfied that he was alone for now, he retrieved the metallic device and approached the station's main structure. Inside, the place was a mess, broken windows, peeling paint, and shelves lined with dusty cans and bottles. Chuck moved with purpose, setting the device on a makeshift table in the center of the room. He pressed a series of buttons and the walls came alive with projections, maps, surveillance footage, and encrypted messages scrolling across every available surface. "This ends tonight," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested finality. Whether he was referring to the pursuit, the mission, or something else entirely remained unclear. But one thing was certain. Whoever Chuck Norris really was, he wasn't running anymore. Behind him, the patrol cars screeched to a halt outside, their engines roaring as officers spilled out, guns drawn. Agent Laura Bennett arrived moments later, stepping out of her sedan with a determined expression. She surveyed the scene, her hand resting on the holster at her side. "Stay alert," she instructed her team. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Inside the gas station, Chuck watched their approach on the holographic displays. He adjusted a dial on the device, causing the images to shift and zoom. Each face was captured in perfect detail, their expressions ranging from cautious to outright terrified. Chuck smiled faintly. They were afraid, but not nearly enough. Outside, Laura raised her voice, addressing the building directly. "This is Agent Laura Bennett with the Federal Investigation Unit. Come out with your hands up, you are surrounded." For a moment, there was no response. Then, the door creaked open slowly, revealing Chuck standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the glowing projections inside. His hands were raised, but his demeanor was calm, almost serene. "I'm unarmed," he said simply, stepping into the light. "But I think we both know this isn't about weapons." Laura narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. "Who are you? And what do you want?" Chuck tilted his head slightly, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "Let's just say I'm someone trying to fix a problem before it becomes everyone's problem. Now, are you going to arrest me or are we going to talk?" The tension outside the gas station was palpable, thick enough to choke on. The cold night air carried the faint smell of gasoline and damp earth, mixing with the metallic tang of fear that hung over the group of officers. Agent Laura Bennett stood at the forefront, her sharp eyes locked onto Chuck as he stepped further into the light. His calm demeanor didn't match the chaos unfolding around him, and that unnerved her more than anything else. "Who are you?" Laura demanded again, her voice firm but controlled. She wasn't here to play games. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Behind her, the officers shifted uneasily, their weapons trained on Chuck but their expressions uncertain. Something about this man, his posture, his unwavering gaze, made it clear he wasn't an ordinary suspect. Chuck lowered his hand slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and measured. "You can call me Chuck," he replied, his tone neutral. "And I'm not your enemy." Laura frowned, stepping closer cautiously. "That's not what I asked. Who are you really? And what is all this?" She gestured toward the glowing projections inside the gas station, their intricate patterns casting strange shadows on the cracked walls. Chuck glanced back at the holograms briefly before returning his attention to Laura. "It's complicated," he admitted, "but if you're willing to listen, I'll explain everything." Laura hesitated, torn between skepticism and curiosity. This man had already demonstrated technology far beyond anything she'd encountered in her career. If he was telling the truth, and if he truly wanted to help, then arresting him outright might do more harm than good. On the other hand, trusting him could be a grave mistake. She decided to tread carefully. "Fine," she said finally, lowering her hand from her holster. "Talk, but make it quick." Chuck nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her decision. He moved to stand near one of the holographic displays, using it as a visual aid. "What you see here isn't just advanced tech. It's part of something bigger. A project designed to prevent disasters before they happen. Think of it as predictive intelligence." Laura crossed her arms, studying the images projected on the wall. They showed detailed maps overlaid with data streams, satellite feeds, and what looked like encrypted communications. "Predictive intelligence," she repeated skeptically. "For what purpose?" "For stopping threats," Chuck explained. "Not just criminal activity, but global-level dangers. Epidemics, natural disasters, even acts of terrorism. This system identifies patterns humans miss, giving us a chance to intervene early." One of the officers muttered under his breath. "Sounds like science fiction." Chuck heard him and smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes fiction becomes reality." Laura ignored the comment, focusing instead on the implications of what Chuck was saying. If his claims were true, and if the technology worked as described, it could revolutionize law enforcement and disaster response. But there was still the matter of why he was being pursued. If this is so important, why are you running? Why not share it with the authorities? Chuck's expression darkened slightly. Because not everyone has humanity's best interests at heart. There are people, organizations who want this technology for themselves. To control it, weaponize it, or worse. If it falls into the wrong hands. He trailed off, letting the unspoken consequences hang in the air. Laura processed this, her mind racing. It sounded like a conspiracy theory, but given the evidence in front of her, she couldn't dismiss it outright. Still, she needed proof. "Show me," she said, abruptly. "Prove it works." Chuck raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her boldness. "All right," he agreed. He tapped a sequence on the device in his hand, and the hologram shifted to display real-time footage of nearby locations. The highway they'd come from, the diner, where the incident occurred, even the surrounding woods. One projection zoomed in on a hidden camera mounted high in a tree, its lens pointed directly at the gas station. "This network monitors everything," Chuck explained. "It tracks movement, analyzes behavior, and predicts outcomes based on collected data. For example," he paused, tapping another button. The image changed to show a map dotted with red markers. These represent potential threats within a 50-mile radius. Some are minor, speeding vehicles, illegal activities, but others. He pointed to a cluster of markers near the edge of the map. Others are catastrophic. Laura studied the markers closely, her pulse quickening. What kind of catastrophe? A chemical spill, Chuck answered grimly. A tanker carrying hazardous materials overturned 20 miles from here 2 hours ago. Local authorities haven't responded yet because no one knows about it. By the time they do, it'll be too late. Laura's jaw tightened. She turned to one of her officers. Verify that report, now. The officer nodded and hurried to his car, radioing in the details. Within minutes, confirmation came through. The accident had indeed occurred. An emergency. Services were scrambling to contain the situation. Chuck watched silently as Laura absorbed the information. This is just one example, he said quietly. Imagine how many lives we could save if we acted sooner. Laura exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Her instincts told her to trust this man, but years of experience warned her to remain cautious. Even if I believe you, she began, there's still the issue of procedure. You can't operate outside the law, no matter how noble your intentions. I know, Chuck replied simply, which is why I'm offering you a choice. Work with me, or try to stop me. The weight of his words settled over the group. Laura glanced at the officers behind her, then back at Chuck. If I agree to work with you, what happens next? We identify the immediate threats and neutralize them, Chuck said without hesitation. Then we find a way to protect this technology from falling into the wrong hands. And if I say no? Chuck met her gaze steadily. Then you'll have to catch me first. Laura considered her options carefully. Arresting Chuck would mean confiscating the device and potentially losing access to its capabilities altogether. Working with him, however risky, offered a chance to use the technology for good. After a long pause, she made her decision. Fine, she said firmly. We'll do it your way for now, but if you cross me, you'll regret it. Chuck nodded, satisfied. Fair enough. As the standoff ended, the officers lowered their weapons, though their grips remained tight. Laura motioned for 2 of them to accompany her inside the gas station, while the rest secured the perimeter. Once inside, Chuck demonstrated the full scope of the device's functions, walking them through its interface and explaining its limitations. Despite its advanced nature, it required human input to function effectively, a safeguard against misuse. Meanwhile, outside, Melissa sat in her small apartment above the diner, staring at the second device she'd found earlier. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone, unsure whether it would help or hurt Chuck's situation. Turning it over in her hands, she noticed a tiny button on its side. Hesitating only briefly, she pressed it. Instantly, the device sprang to life, projecting a miniature version of the same holographic interface Chuck had used. Maps, symbols, and streams of data floated in the air, filling the room with soft blue light. Melissa gasped, instinctively reaching out to touch one of the projections. As soon as her fingers brushed against it, the image shifted, zooming in, on a specific location, the gas station. Her heart raced as she realized what she was seeing. Whatever this device was, it was connected to Chuck, and possibly to the events unfolding right now. Without thinking twice, she grabbed her coat and keys and headed out the door, determined to find answers. Back at the gas station, Laura and Chuck finalized their plan. Using the device, they identified several critical threats and prioritized them based on urgency. The chemical spill took precedence, followed by a series of coordinated cyber attacks targeting local infrastructure. With each revelation, Laura grew more convinced that working with Chuck was the right decision. As dawn approached, the team prepared to leave the gas station, splitting into groups to address the various crises. Chuck lingered for a moment, watching, the horizon lighten with the promise of a new day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he couldn't face them alone. For better or worse, he'd gained an unlikely ally in Agent Laura Bennett. Unbeknownst to both of them, Melissa pulled her car to a stop a short distance away, peering through the trees at the glowing gas station. Clutching the second device tightly, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, or if she was about to uncover something extraordinary. The first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Melissa stood at the edge of the woods, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. She clutched the metallic device tightly in her hands, its soft glow illuminating her face. The holograms it projected danced across the space in front of her, shifting and changing as though alive. Maps, symbols, and streams of data floated before her eyes, each image more intricate than the last. She glanced toward the gas station, again where she could see figures moving about under the dim red and blue flashes of police lights. Something big was happening there, something tied to the mysterious man who had walked into their diner just hours earlier. Melissa felt torn between curiosity and fear. What had she gotten herself into? Was this device evidence of something dangerous? Or was it a key to understanding what Chuck was trying to do? Taking a deep breath, Melissa made up her mind. Whatever this was, she couldn't ignore it. If Chuck trusted her, or if fate had placed her here for a reason, then she needed to act. With one last look at the projections hovering above the device, she slipped it into her pocket and stepped out onto the gravel driveway, walking cautiously toward the gas station. Inside, Laura and Chuck were finalizing plans with the officers. The room buzzed with activity as they coordinated responses to the threats identified by the device. Holographic displays covered every wall, showing real-time updates on the chemical spill cleanup, surveillance footage from nearby towns, and encrypted messages intercepted from unknown sources. "We need boots on the ground," Laura said firmly, pointing to a cluster of red markers on one of the maps. "These areas are high-risk zones. Send teams there immediately." Chuck nodded in agreement, his expression serious but calm. "And we'll monitor everything from here. This system will alert us to any new developments." One of the officers spoke up hesitantly. "What about him?" He gestured toward Chuck. "Shouldn't he come with us?" Laura shook her head. "No. He stays here until we know more. We can't risk losing access to this technology." Her tone left no room for argument. As the group prepared to leave, the door creaked open, drawing everyone's attention. Melissa stepped inside, her heart pounding as all eyes turned to her. For a moment she froze, unsure how to explain her presence. Then she pulled the second device from her pocket and held it up, its glow casting a soft light across the room. "I think you're looking for this," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I found it at the diner." For a beat, no one moved. Then Chuck's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good instincts," he said, stepping forward to take the device from her. "You didn't tell anyone?" Melissa shook her head. "I wasn't sure. I didn't know what to do." Laura studied the young waitress carefully, her sharp gaze assessing both her and the device. "Where exactly did you find it?" "It was stuck under one of the booths," Melissa explained. "After you all left, I noticed it while cleaning up. I thought it might belong to him." She nodded toward Chuck. Laura exchanged a glance with Chuck, who seemed unsurprised by Melissa's discovery. "Looks like you have a knack for finding important things," he remarked, examining the device briefly before tucking it away. Laura turned back to Melissa, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you for bringing it. But now that you're involved, we need to keep you safe. Do you understand?" Melissa nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. She didn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation, but she knew enough to realize that walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. With the additional device secured, Chuck and Laura resumed their work. Using the combined capabilities of both gadgets, they refined their strategy, prioritizing the most urgent threats while keeping tabs on potential dangers. The chemical spill response team reported progress, and the cyber attack threat appeared contained. For now. Still, neither Chuck nor Laura relaxed. Experience told them crises rarely came alone. As the morning wore on, Melissa stayed close, watching silently as the two worked together. Despite their differences, there was a mutual respect between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that survival depended on cooperation. Laura's professionalism balanced Chuck's quiet confidence, creating an uneasy but effective partnership. Outside, the officers returned periodically with updates, their faces reflecting varying degrees of exhaustion and tension. The stakes were high, and everyone felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. Yet amid the chaos, there was also a sense of purpose, a shared determination to protect lives and prevent disaster. By mid-morning, the immediate threats had been addressed, but questions remained. Who was behind the tanker accident? Why had the cyber attacks targeted local infrastructure? And perhaps most importantly, who else knew about Chuck's technology, and what did they want with it? Laura confronted these questions head-on, pacing the length of the gas station as she pieced together clues. "There's a pattern here," she said aloud, studying the holograms. "These incidents aren't random. Someone's orchestrating them." Chuck nodded grimly. "Agreed. And they're testing us, seeing how far we'll go to stop them." "And if we fail?" Laura asked, though she already knew the answer. Chuck met her gaze steadily. "Then we lose more than just this fight." Melissa listened intently, her mind racing. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. Finally, she spoke up. "Is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" Chuck considered her question, then handed her the smaller device. "Keep this safe. It's a backup. If anything happens, to me or the main unit, it'll ensure we don't lose everything." Melissa accepted the device solemnly, feeling its weight in her palm. "I won't let you down," she promised. As the day continued, the group remained vigilant, monitoring the situation closely. They knew the lull wouldn't last long. Whatever force they were up against wouldn't give up easily. But for now they had gained valuable time and allies. When evening fell, the gas station transformed once again. The red and blue lights of the police cars were replaced by the warm glow of lanterns set up inside. Exhausted but resolute, the team gathered around the central table, reviewing their progress and planning next steps. Laura leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "We've done good work today," she admitted. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." Chuck agreed, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room. "Tomorrow we dig deeper, find out who's pulling the strings." Melissa sat quietly, clutching the device in her lap. She felt a strange mix of fear and resolve, knowing that her life had changed forever. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready, or as ready as she could be. Under the watchful eyes of the stars, the unlikely trio prepared for what was to come. Together they had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. But the battle was far from won, and the road ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine.